Welcome back to B2B Storytelling Stars, presented by Intuit Mailchimp. I'm your host, Jay Acunzo, and in this series, I'm going behind the scenes with you to develop the messages and the signature stories of 3 exceptional marketers and B2B leaders. Today, go inside my one-on-one call with Natalie Taylor. Natalie is the head of marketing at the video software startup Capsule, which is an editor made for enterprise brands. So in some sense, they help heads of creative at large companies democratize video. But as you'll hear today, that idea makes their audience a little uncomfortable, and maybe they should actually acknowledge that and develop a message around that. Something to consider. But regardless, their message needs to be developed at Capsule in order for it to resonate with other people. And you'll go inside that process today with me and Nat. Nat arrived to this coaching call feeling pretty good about the progress she's made so far after our group call that kicked off this series. She said that she felt her premise was pretty close to being publicly ready. And so today, we're going to tighten some things and ensure that she's going beyond just a nice sounding line or an analogy that's kind of a throwaway moment. And instead, we really flesh out Capsule's unique perspective and the metaphor that they're trying to own publicly so that others who hear them communicate instantly care. So far, Natalie's been talking about how heads of creative at enterprise brands, in other words, Capsule's buyers, can't just be creators. They need to become masterful conductors. And that's an important point that they need to make, but they also have to differentiate that message from all of the popular knowledge about evolving from practitioner to team manager. That's not what they're saying. There's a lot more nuance, and it's much more focused on creative and video specifically. And it's also different than them saying they want to democratize video. So there's a brutal honesty to their message and a brutal honesty to where our conversation goes in this call, which benefits both Nat and her audience. And all of this is going to center around one key story they're developing to resonate. Let's get to it.
So I shared this with our go-to-market team, the 2 people on our sales team and our CEO. And I should actually read you what our CEO wrote. He goes, "Damn, this was cool. That guy knows how to dig. Wow." Kind of has me rethinking our launch video. We're like in the process of, we're doing a big launch next month where we're coming out of beta. We're calling it Capsule 1.0. Mm-hmm. And basically telling a version of this story, like focusing on the enterprise narrative use case, the pain point, the problem that Capsule specifically solves to alleviate that pain point. And so we've been working a lot on a script for a launch video. So that's where that came from. But
yeah, makes sense.
But I think it's the one thing we talked about is like, imagine that there's like a pie chart that is divided by maybe rote requests and kind of like just content creation, managing requests. And then the other half is being a conductor and working on and creating the things that you want to. Right. There's always going to be a little bit of both, but I think what we want to push people toward and help them be able to do is help them have more control over what that balance is.
Totally. And imagine like the fun of these calls for me is we pull a thread that feels like it's emerging, but not it yet. And we just play it forward for the exercise of it. Because sometimes we find really important things down that path and we want to take it with us. Sometimes we just get accustomed, or you get accustomed to seeing, oh, okay, that's the work we're about to do. So I want to do one of those here. So basically, seeing that there's 2 things at play is an interesting start, but there's a lot of variables going on in that person's world, the head of creative, the head of brand, the head of video. And so they're looking at a single project, request, whatever, and they're trying to make sense of the conductor-creator ratio beneath that, or inclusive of that. I mean, imagine as part of your IP, it kind of resembles being an author, but that's what we're kind of trying to do for brands today too, is you have something really potent to say and to teach, right? You're resonating very deeply and it's highly shareable. Imagine as part of your IP sometime down the road is some kind of 2x2 matrix. I mean, everybody has the Dwight Eisenhower decision-making matrix, right? I forget what the 2x2 actually says, but it's like, it's it's urgent or not urgent. Like, you kind of say, okay, before I decide what I'm going to focus on, I'm going to look at this and plot where this sits on the matrix. And then I will like prioritize my list of to-dos accordingly, right? Same deal for you. If you get clarity around what we're trying to say, like the story of the brand or even the story of the series you're building, then you're like, okay, how do I, to your point, start testing and validating this with the market? Well, we should be able to spot, oh, okay, that's a question that logically follows. It's like being a comedian. When you have a premise, you develop the material afterwards. You ask the logic next question of like, if that's what I'm asserting, how do I develop the joke? Well, the next question on my mind and the audience's is probably this. So the next question on your audience's mind is probably like, okay, these are nice ideas. And I agree that I have to balance being a creator and being a conductor all over the place. How do I actually then like do that with this next thing I'm focused on? Right. And so like, we don't know. But that's content, right? That's the next essay, the next newsletter, the next series of social posts. You're trying to write your way there. And somewhere further down that same path is like, and here's this visual framework we've created to help you make that decision. That to me is one of the calling cards of true B2B storytelling is you do have the premise, but you also have this collection of stuff around it that represents like your IP for your brand. As an author, that's always looking for what are the contextual or visual models that I can use to teach something that feels a little too ineffable or hard to make concrete. It's one thing to say I have a model for what a marketing funnel is. We all have a million of those. You're taking something that right now has no form or function or even language, and you're looking to give it language. So you're going to have key terms you define. You're going to have signature stories you create. You're going to have, heuristics you come up with, like the 6 Ps of this, right? And somewhere down the road, you're going to have this gem of a visual that is like the methodology to help people do that. So that's the end of my rant.
Cool.
But I think that's the thread that you just presented to me, which is now we got to validate this, which means we're just going to scan the language we have. And in the doc, we can just leave comments to be like, that's a question, that's a question, that's a question. That's an objection. That's a term that we got to go and look at the dictionary definition and rewrite it for our purposes and on down the line. So now all of a sudden you have a content pipeline too, right? You are full up on ideas to grow your audience and business, but also double timing it as we're sharpening our thinking and our IP at the same time. So you're not like in a hole somewhere and then you come out 6 months later because we can't do that as marketers.
I am thinking about the content, like the next step of like testing this and publishing this and putting it out. And that also still feels really fuzzy to me. Because,
cool. Let's get into that. Yeah.
Because
totally.
it's a group of people, like, I've been going to these dinners. I'm connected to these people on LinkedIn. It's still a very small group of people who maybe aren't on LinkedIn all that much. It's not like the people that I necessarily interact with a lot on LinkedIn. And so I'm just trying to figure out the best way to test this message with the right people.
So there's 2 ways to do that. It's content and conversation. Conversation's always easiest if you're already having them. I would also ask of like, the other thing to look at is formal versus informal. Informal is like, I got a bunch of friends that are in this space and I just want to be like, hey, let's grab coffee. I'm thinking about this stuff. Formal is much more like creating audience board, right? Like I've heard people say there's like, they create a board of customers and that those customers are always helping them validate their thinking, their positioning, their product offering even, right? So that's more formal than it is informal. So let's start there. Before we get to the language of the empathy statement, we want to validate and test this stuff. I think the best way to do that is to lean into where you've got momentum and you don't have to like engineer it for the first time. So for me personally, my newsletter, my social following, anywhere I show up, just so happens to be LinkedIn is the prime place for me right now. But I'm just going to continue leaning in. I think of it as like I'm steering a ship and I'm going to slowly turn that ship towards this premise. I'm not going to like repaint the hull and be like, hull, right? That's a term from this metaphor I'm now ruining, right? I don't know. I'm not going to like completely change what I'm doing and turn on a dime because I'm like, this feels right. I'm going to like add a couple of sprinklings into the normal cadence of conversation or content of the empathy statement, starting with a template that I have for you further down the doc, which is like a stake in the ground post where you're like, I'm just going to come out with it already. I'm just going to use the empathy statement language, but in article form, right? That's it. I'm just going to like step back and be like, does anyone else see it this way? And just look for a couple of people responding with passion to see if they're actually the right people or directionally. So, but before we can do that, we got to think about where are we going to put it. So I know you're a startup and I know you yourself are not the audience you're selling into. Where are you already engaging with those people? So you mentioned these dinners. Is there anywhere else? And it might not be you. It might be your CEO, for example.
Right. Yeah. I think the dinners is the big thing. And beyond that, I think it is just kind of like individual conversations, probably mostly the CEO with these people. And, even our like head of sales. Like after the dinner, I don't really have much communication or direct conversation with these like target audience folks once they kind of move into like customer pilot phase.
Yeah. Right.
I just not directly, like, I'm involved with it, but not directly.
Okay. The easiest asks are either low time commitment or high on prestige. So low time commitment is like, can you answer this one question? We'll quote you, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. You don't learn much. There's not much back and forth. The high on prestige piece would be, all right, we're going to write this strongly worded piece, and then we're going to take excerpts and pieces and repurpose it onto Twitter and LinkedIn and all these things. We're going to do an idea tour of our empathy statement. But then we're going to basically pitch a bunch of people and say, hey, we wrote this piece. It's here. That's kind of the opening salvo. We are going to then do a series featuring, insert a very manageable small number here, 4 leaders of these departments, each interviewed with their own separate piece on how they think about and approach this same problem, right? So like either read this ahead of time or on the call, I'll give you the context of it. And my first question will just be to react to that. And then I'll have some follow-up questions or whatever, right? But it's you lionized as the subject and featured high on prestige. So it's an easier yes if you're a busy professional. So like to me, that sounds like good marketing, but it also sounds like good IP development because like it's super easy and I think underutilized by marketers to like earmark and almost maybe like sub-brand if needed a content series. Yes, to handshake those individuals. Yes, hopefully to get readership or followers, but more so to be able to just sort of test the waters and how you say the things that you're trying to say.
You're saying like basically do a content series before you have a premise?
Correct. What I'm saying is I want you to stop acting like an expert or even a marketer, and I want you to act like an explorer. I want you to investigate not only, what am I saying? We're working on that. But more importantly, how do we say this? Like you have conviction. Don't drop the idea because it doesn't hit once or twice and then go say whatever, everyone else in your space is saying. And now you have to hype harder and rank higher because you're all the same. No, don't work outside in like that. Work inside out. We have conviction. We have a belief system. We have a perspective here at Capsule. And what we're trying to now figure out is how to show them what we see, how to use the language that causes them to go, oh my gosh, yes, this. And also you, and also 5 friends, follow them, right? Like go with them, buy from them. That's what we're looking for is you're going to use your material like a comedian at a small comedy club to test the right way to say it, and the good news is with that is some forward progress on your marketing, right? Because you're doing it publicly. It will attract at least the one person you're featuring and handshake them or go deeper with them if you've already met them and maybe get some audience and results. But the prime reason we're doing that is to be like, we're really bullish on this idea of like the future is this, the method is calibrate your role as a creator and a conductor. And that's a fascinating thing that we're all facing and we're not really talking about it. We're going to do a 4-part creator and conductor series.
Right.
And then you step back and you're like, cool. So we wrote the pillar piece. We featured 4 people in this series. What did we learn? You go back to the empathy statement, you update how you say it, and then you go back out to market. It's this kind of like accordion of like, we're out there saying stuff, we're back internal, sharpening our ideas and the starter dough of those ideas. Then we're back externally, right? And the goal is eventually, like every time you go external, you're there with greater power. Because like what you're saying is inescapably it. Next up, Nat and I walk through the progress that we've made so far on her empathy statement. So if you watched other videos in this series, you know that when you're developing your premise, you eventually arrive at something that answers the question, why should I care about you? That would be pretty rude to hear somebody say, but as communicators, marketers, and leaders, we have to be thinking that others are wondering it all the time? And we should answer that through an empathy statement. First, align with the audience's current realities and goals. Second, agitate the problems getting in the way of achieving those goals. Third, the hardest part, the assertion. Assert your premise. How do you see things? What should be despite what is? And how is that vision different and maybe clearer than your competition? So Nat and I need to work out those 3 beats and where this takes both Natalie and her teammates at Capsule. Here we go. You are a head of creative at a large organization and you care about the brand and pushing it forward. Maybe you're managing requests and processes for design and you've got a million things. Let's say, I think we have to agitate a little bit in this section, even though it's the align section. And you've got a million things to juggle to do that, let alone do it well. Or maybe you're focused on a big new campaign or supporting multiple stakeholders around the organization.
Yeah, supporting stakeholders, but like completing things for stakeholders. I don't know if supporting is the right word. It's like
completing things.
Yeah.
For multiple stakeholders, which means one of your biggest priorities is to free up the bottleneck. This like pillar idea of the overall message you have is freeing up the bottleneck, not the thing driving them, right? But a thing they're acutely struggling with or at least aware of.
It's not just like tons of requests from like one team. It's like requests across the whole organization. And I don't know if we get into this yet, but there's varying degrees of expertise and skill around video and like varying degrees of support needed for different types of teams. Like, some people may be great storytellers and just need some polish. Some teams may just have no idea how to even, like, they have to do everything for them.
All right. So like, here's what this sounds like when we, I think, nail it. You're a head of creative at a large organization and you care about the brand and pushing it forward. Maybe you're managing requests for processes for design and you've got a million things to juggle to do that, let alone do it well. Or maybe you're focused on a big new campaign or completing things for multiple stakeholders. And now it's like, and into all that, right? More recently, you're seeing the demand for video like never before. Every department wants to, or maybe is just being asked to, communicate through video. It's the most human form of communication in this era of bland sameness, questionable sources, and infinite content. It's also the most in-demand form of content by the platforms where we show up. You've never needed to think about and create video more than right now. And this has led to a singular problem, the video bottleneck, right? So the thing is, and this is something you have to acknowledge to align with people. The thing is, you didn't get into this work to free up a bottleneck in workflow and requests. You got into this work to produce high value, highly creative projects. But unless the bottleneck stops being a problem, your own fulfillment as a creative and the results you're capable of delivering don't seem within reach, right? So this is merely to say, are we on the same page, right? And we can quibble with like keywords here, or, and there, but like, are we on the same page? And you want the audience to go, yes, right? Like really simply, yep. You're not like, oh my gosh, they're amazing. It's just like, yep, speaking my language. That's it. Yep. We're aligned. So now we go to agitate. And this is where you make clear, we've seen what unfolds when that is your reality. And it seems like we're getting further from a solution, not closer to it. And I would say like to address that core problem and get back to creating better, more creative work, you've tried any number of things. Now, remember, we're not going to belabor these points everywhere we show up. This is just like sort of painting the scenario if they give us the most time possible. So you've tried any number of things. You have some good systems and guidelines in place, like After Effects, scripts, project management tools, and brand guidelines your team has built. But you're still bottlenecked because others around you only have finite skills and experience when it comes to video. Only like 0.1% of people in an organization can even create video. So the problem isn't actually that you need better systems and workflows. The problem is the people around you just aren't well versed enough in video. And making matters worse, they're not going to spend time to get there. We know that's the solution, but that's not going to actually happen. So don't tinker on your own workflows. Don't buy more expensive consultant approved team building education or camaraderie. The problem's not actually you. The problem is them. And this means you are not working on the things that uniquely require you. You are working on the things that they really ought to be doing. And this drags down your value and the value of video. This lowers the ROI of your efforts. This makes video and your creative aspirations as a professional further out of reach for all involved. It's almost like we're screwed. We're not saying that here, but people go, oh my gosh, yeah, I feel all this. And this doesn't seem to be helping me. This seems to be just telling me that this is really dire, right?
Yeah.
And so now what we need to do is arrive at this assertion point, arrive at this point where you're like, well, there's hope yet. Status quo is broken. This is how it should go. Talk to me about that, because last time that was the missing piece.
What's the assertion we're making beyond just like use Capsule? But I guess that's where I'm feeling a little
products
have
confused. Points of view, right? Use Capsule. Why? Because Capsule allows you to do what? Because the team at Capsule believes what, right?
Gotcha.
This is not where you assert by Capsule. This is where you assert what they should be doing regardless of the product they use. And because you're telling that story, they're going to go, oh my gosh, I'm so ready to do this. How? And you're like, well, we have like a bunch of tactics. We have a philosophy here. We have a blueprint. We have a framework. Honestly, the best way to do this is by Capsule, right? That's all built into the product. You know, this belief, this story, this reality that you are going through informs everything we do, right? So there's the call to action is more like a whisper, because they already feel like this urge to act. And the tipping point is like, sounds like, oh, by the way, you know? So if this is your story, if you are aligned, if I'm aligned with you, if I've acknowledged your pain, and if I assert this is how it should look, oh, by the way, we have a product for that. It's like the product needs to actually be an afterthought when you position your brand in the market and you create most of your content. Once in a while, you are enabling sales and doing product marketing, of course, but most of the story is built on whether or not we exist. This is how we all see it. And we're actually taking action because of that to build a product and offer education and a dinner series and a content, right? So that's what we're looking for, is not assert, go get Capsule, because that's leaping too far ahead.
These heads of creative, they're trying to be conductors. You know, they have all of these guidelines. There's just actually not tools to help support that. And that's what we hear over and over is like, we write up all these docs. We have all these like guidelines for teams who are trying to make videos on their own, or just the process for working with us to make videos. And so they're trying to be conductors, and like they're cognizant of that balance. I don't know. I'm trying to like get around the tooling itself, but like there just isn't tooling that allows that to happen. And that is why Capsule exists, is to make video easy and scalable, solving both sides of that frustration.
I think the missing piece here is, and this is something you might consider saying, right? So when you watch this video, we're addressing this all-important assertion part, because that's what a premise is. It's an assertion you make. Revisit this section and put it to writing. I think it's like a homework assignment. The most important thing that you can possibly do is learn where to create and where to conduct. And of these two things, most of us got into this creative work to create. We are creatives. We're not conductors, right? Like we don't necessarily come up mastering that skill. Conducting is an entirely different skill, in the same way that management is a different skill than practicing, right? We know that. So the thing is, where you're trying to help them thrive is really on the conductor side, right? Okay, well, let's play that forward a little bit. When you're a conductor, these things happen, right? We need to figure out what those are, which sound like the desirable outcomes for them and their teams or stakeholders, right? And then you can go back to the analogy of being a conductor and say, this is not allowing others to just play however they want. That's what most tools want to do when they say they democratize X creation, right? No, we actually don't want them to run free and create video very easily. Creating video very easily, not the goal. Freeing up the bottleneck. Getting rid of the bottleneck, freeing you up. Those are the goals, right? What does a conductor do? Is they prompt, they guide, they command, they both see the whole and zoom in on the parts, right? So that the whole makes sense. So again, this is not, and I wrote down, this is not allowing others to just play however they want. That would be chaos, both because they are not professional full-time musicians the way you are, and because they have to exist inside the larger group. They have to play under your brand symphony in a way that actually harmonizes, right? And that goes well beyond using the right color schemes. And conductors don't outsource or push off to others. Conductors guide. They tease things out of others and they guide. And that gets them what they know they need, even if the person playing the instrument doesn't quite get it. They are a trumpet player. They are a product marketer. Go be a great trumpet player. Go be a great product marketer. The product here is not playing the trumpet or product marketing. The product here is it's a symphony playing this song or this concert. It's a brand, right? Okay, the product marketer is not responsible to keep the whole in mind. The trumpet player is not responsible. The conductor is. And the conductor doesn't do that by being like, all right, now you go play your part. I've written out the music for you. No. The conductor knows how to calibrate, how forcefully or gently they guide. And sometimes they do it very gently as a nudge, and sometimes they're doing it very loudly. So that is actually the skill that we want you as a head of creative to master, right? How do we do that? Well, that's what you have to go and explore and develop, right? You have to be like, here's an example of someone who's learned how to do that. Here's some knowledge from our experts. Or, hey, we don't know how to do this. So we're going to have this content series we create. We're going to have this dinner series we create where that's the difficult question we're putting before people. Play the analogy forward. It seems really silly. Creative conductors is actually what we want to create here, not outsourcing or democratizing video. We are in the business of helping you, the leader, become a masterful creative conductor. Do you want that or not? Because by the way, we have a product built on that philosophy. That's where the product comes in.
Love that. I think that feels solid. That feels good to me.
Yeah. So watch my rant back and pull down pieces of what I said, which is built off of what you've written and come up with your colleagues. Pull down the right parts into the empathy statement. I can imagine the heads of creative that you're trying to reach. If somebody finally admitted, especially a tools vendor, hey, you know how you've heard other companies talk about democratizing X, where X is design, illustration, video, podcasting, writing, X is creativity. Doesn't that make you feel at least a little uneasy? Because it certainly does for me. It certainly does for us. We want the spirit of that. We want that. But the letter of it, the way it's actually carried out, it's not cutting it. Right? So maybe that's the underpinning issue here is and how do we usually do this? Whether it's at our organizations or we're observing it. People are using all these cheap tools and it looks terrible. We're doing this, and it's bad or ineffectual, right? Because we can't really escape this. It's time we admit this. The democratization of creativity, especially on behalf of our brand, as creative leaders, that does not make us feel good, right? So we want some of the benefits, but certainly don't want how it's usually carried out. What do we need to do as a result? Well, we need to stop outsourcing. We need to stop democratizing, and we need to learn how to start conducting, right? There's a stop-start statement. If that's what you believe, if that story is for you, oh, by the way, thing on offer, product, content series, dinner series. Hey, come interview with us, be a part of the team. Can I interview you for the series or article, right? Everything that you want, all the calls to action come on the back end of a pitch that sounds like that because you rev them up and they're like, oh my gosh, yes. Natalie faces two challenges from here. Number one, she's not the buyer. We've talked about that a little bit. So developing stories to illuminate the company's premise is going to depend on her ability to go out and talk to her audience. Yes, to run the ideas by them, but also to feature them in her content. I mean, what could be easier than actually talking about your own past experiences? It's not a luxury that Nat really enjoys unless she's drawing on her own past experiences as a powerful source of metaphor. Something tells me that she will. But if she's going to try and come up with an example, somebody else who's done it the way they're prescribing it, that has to come from somebody else, not her own past career stops. And the second challenge she faces is just like any of us developing a premise at her stage, she's new to this, as are the teammates around her. So practice is paramount. Practice is crucial. Like a comedian on small stages at small comedy clubs, you have to work out your material because you thought you should say it this way, and then it doesn't resonate, and so you have to go back to the drawing board and update it to stick. Now, both of these things, this idea that you have to find stories from others and you have to practice your material, it reminds me of being a public speaker, which I am. I've given keynotes in 25 states in the US and 3 different countries to marketers in audiences as big as 4,000 at an industry expo and as small as 40 CMOs behind closed doors. But those were marketers. The thing is, to be a professional speaker, I've also given keynotes way outside my echo chamber to dentists and truckers and farmers, HR professionals, HVAC small business owners. I'm definitely not from those industries. So as a speaker, You learn how to structure your ideas and how to deliver them so they resonate no matter what room you're in, even if you are not them. It starts by learning how to have a dialogue with the audience when their part is pretty much implied. And to do that, I've created a resource that both Natalie and you can use. So alongside this video, I'm sharing a template that I've used for many years to both assess my ideas and develop my speeches. It's called the Dialogue Outline. And even if you're never going to give a speech, it's a really good rubric for whether or not your ideas are powerful enough to lead people from where they're at to where you need them to go for them to take an action involving your brand. Do your ideas make sense and in the right order? That's the power of having this implied dialogue with your audience. This outline can transform you from smart marketer or expert or executive to a leading voice in your space. I really believe that, and I've done that and benefited from that my whole career, both myself and with clients. So if you're interested in using that template, you can get it completely for free, no forms required, at jacunzo.com/stars. And while you're there, explore the other videos in this series and their associated templates and resources. Thank you to Mailchimp for making this series possible. Thank you for doing the hard work that you do. I'm Jay Acunzo. Keep making what matters, because when your ideas matter and you develop them to matter, you can hustle for attention less. I'll see you next time.